guys actually
All
coordinate this,
right.
or is this just?
It is 1 p.m. and we are here for the notice of public meeting for the Child Support Guidelines Committee. It is March 9th, 2018, and I am not sure if we have a quorum yet or not, so we will start with roll call to see what we have. Kathleen Baker,
Present.
Karen Cliff, Alan Crecilius, Senator Farley, Assemblyman Fumo, Judge Hoskin,
Here.
Nova Murray,
Present.
Assemblyman Pickard, Judge Robb, Senator Roberson, Joseph Sanford, Judge Shirley,
Present.
Justice Stiglitz, Kim Surratt, present, and Don Throne.
Present.
All right, we don't have a quorum.
Do you want to wait a couple?
Let's give it a couple of minutes and let's see if we hit a quorum. And then so we'll adjourn for right now and come back in a couple of minutes and see if we have a quorum in just a couple of minutes. I'm not going to give it too much time past maybe 1:05. Maybe we just have people stuck in traffic and we'll see where we're at. Meeting adjourned until 1:05.
Hello?
Those of you that are on the phone, if you could please hold. We are in recess right now, pending an attempt to see if we have a quorum here in a few minutes, and we will continue the meeting at that point.
Okay. Where was the other hole, babe? Oh, yeah, where?
Those of you that are on the phone, if you could please mute your phone for right now, we can hear everything. Thank you.
Okay.
Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Anybody there?
Yeah, they're in recess. Just put your phone on mute and hold, guys.
Oh.
They're about to hold a public comment in a few minutes if they have a
Oh, okay, cool. Thank
All
you.
right, thank you. Who was it?
Mute your phone, please.
Oh, I did.
Okay, I'm going to call this meeting to order again. It's 1:06, and I saw Miss Cliff show up. So we still do not have a quorum. And I do know that Mr. Assemblyman Pickard texted and said that he was 10 minutes out. So the question is whether or not we hold off for Mr. Assemblyman Pickard. Joseph's here. Never mind. We have a quorum. Joseph's here. All right. Let's give it a moment and let Joseph get up to his seat, and then we do have a quorum at that point. All right, Mr. Sanford and Ms. Cliff, if you could just announce your presence for the roll call, and then we'll go on from here.
Ms. Cliff, present.
Joe Sanford, present.
All right, once again, this is the March 9th notice meeting of Child Support Guideline Committee. We will now move on to agenda item number 2, which is the public comment. Public comment is limited to 3 minutes, exactly 3 minutes. I will cut you off even if you were mid-sentence, and we will stay consistent. If you are going to give public comment, if you will start with your full name, and I will start timing you at that point. Do we have anybody in Las Vegas that would like to give public comment at this time?
Yeah, what?
Okay, that's on the phone. We'll get to the phone in just a moment. Do we have anybody in person in Las Vegas? Okay.
Good.
Do we have anybody in Carson City that would like to give public comment at this time? Okay, hearing
You
none.
responded to Las Vegas. I'll respond to Las Vegas.
Okay, if you are on the phone, we are moving on to phone public comment at this time. How many people do I have on the phone that would like to give public comment?
Edward Johnson.
Okay, I can't. Sir, I can barely hear you, so if you could, I hear wind noise, but I couldn't understand your name. Could you please state your name?
Edward Johnson.
Edward Johnson? Okay, Mr. Johnson, you have 3 minutes to give public comment, and you may start now, please.
I'm not exactly sure what the question might be regarding the child support issue, although I had a child support issue. I was incarcerated for 5 years. During that incarceration, the girlfriend decides to, or the mother of my child decides to file for a DNA test and find that the child that she had been raising for 16 years was mine. And the question that I had for the family court judge was, why now? Why after 16 years is she seeking child support and complaining about the child not having a decent pair of tennis shoes when if she would have notified me at the time the child was mine and she was pregnant, if I would have known that I had a child, that I would have paid child support that entire time, and there wouldn't have been an issue with it. So the question that I had for the judge is why now, and why does it matter now? And she ignored the question and insisted that I continue to pay child support from that point forward, which I didn't have a problem doing. But why is it the family court judge can't answer my question, and it's a requirement for me to do what I have to do, and there's no conversation. There can't be a conversation. That's my question.
Okay, thank you, sir. I'm sorry, you still have more testimony?
No.
Okay. Do we have any questions from the commission for Mr. Johnson? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. We appreciate your time today. We will take your comments into consideration in our deliberations. We appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, is there anybody else on the phone that would like to give public comment at this time?
Yes, there is.
Okay, state your name, please, sir.
Hi, my name is Michael McDonald. I am Vice President of the Family Civil Liberties Union, co-counsel, legislative counsel for Reforming Freedom, and working on some of the family and criminal law reform stuff out here. I would like to address the things that you guys are bringing up for possible actions for today's hearing. And I know that part of it is the cost of raising a child. I know a lot of I implore everybody on the committee to please watch Divorce Court and see what devastating effects is going on due to child support. When you're giving power to one parent over the other and imputing child support and making them, it's also causing devastating effects of parental alienation, pathogenic parenting when you make one parent pretty much a slave to the other by paying them. Now, most parents love their children and want to take care of them, and I believe that they should be paying for some amount to take care of their children. Now, most parents will do what's in the best interest, but what I would say is the parents that do not want anything to do with their children, those are the ones that should be paying something as they brought children into this world. I would ask that you guys look into the language for the incarcerated parents and seeing what happens when people are getting thrown in jail, especially with frivolous TPOs or contradictory orders or things that put people in jail where they're not able to pay, and they get out of jail, they have arrears that are stacked up. It should be eliminated. You get thrown in jail, they can't afford to pay. They can't pay the amount. And then they come out and all this arrears, and they get their license taken away. They're thrown in a debtor's prison that was eliminated in 1833. I'd really like you guys to look into that language as well. It's changing the taking away licenses. How are they supposed to go to work? How are you supposed to, they're taking away passports or throwing people in jail. How is that going to benefit the children or the parent? So we'd like to, and actually doing the calculations on the parent, we use a percentage. Now, a lot of the cases that I see in family court, I do a lot of observing, is they fight over because of the money. It pays to fight over your own children, and then you get alienated. There's so many parents that give up, and they can't afford the cost to ongoing litigation, and then they get imputed to child support. And most of the time, they have no access. So I would highly implore the committee to do a study or look into the effects of this, and to show how we should do incentives for parenting and not just enforcement of child support under Title 42, Section 666. So I would ask that we repeal that, and we work on repealing Title 4D, which will hopefully one day will be worked through federal law. And I know you guys have to follow a lot of that. So I would ask that you really look into that and see the devastating effects of the root cause of mass shootings, teen pregnancy, drug use. All this is stemming because of child support. So please consider that, and I thank you for listening to me and taking that into consideration, as this is a very important committee, and I hope that you guys will take all these into consideration and see the effects that it's causing on millions of families, especially on Nevada. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. I appreciate your time. Does anybody on the committee have any questions for Mr. McDonald? Okay, hearing none. Mr. McDonald, I just want to give you a little bit of insight. We do not have any ability to deal with the enforcement mechanisms, such as the driver's licenses, or anything to do with federal law. We have a very narrow scope from our legislature that we have any authority over, and that's the limit of our authority. All right, anybody else on the phone that would like to give public comment at this time?
Hi, my name is Ron Hall.
Repeat your name again, sir. I'm sorry, I couldn't understand.
It's Ron Hall.
Ron Paul. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir. You have 3 minutes.
Yeah, I'm a parent. I've got a daughter that's 3 years old. That my former partner, we were never married, we were engaged, will not allow me to see her. I was in court last week to try to get some visitation, or at least enforce the visitation that was already in place, which was every Sunday for 6 hours. The judge heard my case and reduced my time to 1 hour a week. And I'm wondering why that's even equitable and why that happened, because it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make, she has my child. There's no dispute that I'm the father. And from my understanding, is it starts at 50-50 custody. And I stood there, and I was floored. I didn't know what to say. I get to see my child 1 hour on Sunday every week. And I'm not incarcerated. I don't have a record. The most I've ever had is a speeding ticket. I'm an upstanding citizen. You know, I have no rights right now. So I'd like to address that, or have someone address it and maybe respond to it.
Okay, thank you.
As
Thank
you
you.
can probably tell, I'm a little bit frustrated. I want to see my daughter. I love my daughter.
Okay, thank you, sir. Do you have additional public comment you'd like to give at this time? Okay, does the commission have any questions for Mr. Paul? Okay, Mr. Paul, I would like to let you know that this commission's only job is to look at the child support statutes that are in place and make some decisions regarding modification of those statutes. We can't assist
Right,
you with your
it's
individual
Hall,
case.
H-A-L-L, not
And
Hall.
I'm sorry, what?
It's Hall.
Hall.
H-A-L-L.
I'm sorry, Mr. Hall. I did hear you wrong. But Mr. Hall, we don't deal in anything having to do with custody. We have a very limited scope. The legislature asked us to take a look at child support statutes, and in particular, just the calculation of child support. We're not looking at anything else, and we don't have any authority to look at anything else. So we wish you luck, sir, and if you have any desire to come back and talk about child support with us, we'd love to hear from you. Now, do we have anybody else on the phone that would like to give public comment at this time?
Yes, Roland Mortman, Oklahoma.
Okay, sir, I need you to repeat your name again because I could not understand it.
Yes, is that better? Roland Wortman, Oklahoma.
Roland, can you spell your last name, please?
Wortmann, Wortman.
Wortman. Okay. Thank you, sir. You've got 3 minutes, and you may start now.
First off, I'm wondering why child support ain't based upon a set rate of what it costs to raise a child instead of someone's income, and if DHS feels responsible at all for the suicide rate of fathers who are neglected. I know that ain't DHS problem, but a lot of it falls on it when it comes to financial, because you can't do anything when you're being punished because you can't pay the child you've been put on you. I know there's a 50% law that, or you can't take more than 50% of your paycheck, but it's happened to me. I'm paying more than 50%. I'd like to know why the amount it costs to raise a child ain't based on just that. You know, a set rate across the board. Whatever county, whatever city you live in is on the cost of living, and just be a set rate. Is it because of the amount of money that you can gain off of that, or is this just a profitable thing for you guys, or what's the deal with that?
Okay, sir, is that the end of your public comment?
Yes, pretty much. Well,
Okay.
I got a lot more to say. By God, I do.
Well, you've got 2
that's
more
all I
minutes,
got
sir.
time for.
You're welcome to give any public comment you want in your 3 minutes. You do have a couple minutes left if you'd like to continue.
No, I'd like to have the answer if I could, please.
Oh, I'm sorry, sir. This is just for your public comment for us to consider as if it was testimony in front of us, and it's not an interaction with the committee.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
It's okay. You can
I
listen
just
to
feel
all of
dumb.
our-
Yeah, I just wanted to.
Sure, if you'd like, you can go to the
Yeah,
DWSS website, and the minutes from each of our
Okay.
meetings is posted, and you can read the minutes, and then you can listen to each of our commission meetings, and the public comments for you to give us suggestions and ideas,
Fine.
because we're looking at trying to change the child support statutes to meet the needs of everybody. So if you want to do that, you're welcome to.
Others included. All right, I'll do that. Absolutely. What was the website again? If you don't mind me asking.
Sure, let's find it for you. It is posted at, it's a little bit long. Bear with me,
I got it. You
DWSS
bet.
.nv.gov
Yeah. Cute. What was after NB? I'm sorry.
.gov, like short for government,
Okay.
/,
Got it.
support,
Right.
/CS,
Wow.
_guideline, _committee.
Okay. Committee. Got it.
All of our meeting minutes are
Thank you very
posted
much.
there, along with our agenda, which you'll see what we are contemplating each day. Our goal is to revise and look at new methods of calculating child support, so we take public comment on ideas for that.
Change. Okay, yes, I'm absolutely all about it. I'll be there.
All right,
Checking
thank
it
you,
out.
sir. Is there anybody else on the
Thank
phone
you.
that would like to give public comment at this time?
Child support.
Okay, there was an echo.
Hello. 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 Hello.
Okay, there's an echo, and we can hear you say hello multiple times. What is your name?
My name is Cyrus. I'm here on the talk on the behalf of Michael McDonald.
Mr. McDonald already gave public testimony, so are you saying you're speaking for him?
Well, he already gave public testimony. Okay, well, I'll give my own public testimony.
Okay, I
if
need
he's
you
the
to
one who
spell your
referred to me
name.
for this.
Can you spell your name for us, sir?
I just have to say
Sir,
that
before you start, I need you to spell your name for us so that we can have you accurately in the record.
Okay, my name is Cyrus, Cyrus,
And your last name, sir?
Hojjaty.
Okay, you have 3 minutes, sir.
Yeah, I believe that this whole child support system usually is rigged against men. Men do not have enough time to spend time with their children. Men are also falsely accused and put into jail. Men are often forced to sell like half of their assets and their wealth to give it to the wife. Men are, literally are forced to give like half of their paycheck. It creates loneliness. It creates depression for men. We never talk about this stuff. I was actually yesterday at the women's conference at College of Southern Nevada in Cheyenne Avenue, and there was a total police state over there. I was, first of all, asking, why is MGM Resorts funding this event? They had 5 police officers confronting me. They didn't even let me ask questions. I filmed the event after the event was over. They were telling me I was so loud. After when it was over, it's a total fascist police state for women when it comes to child support, when it comes to feminism, when it comes to all these double standards. Women have affirmative action in a lot of things when it comes to employment. It is time we stop this double standards against men. They have welfare programs to support single mothers. They have a better dating market. We never talk about this stuff. It's time that we stop all this political correctness. So I urge you all to change the child support laws, the welfare, the alimony, everything else to prevent, and even these false rape and sexual harassment allegations, to prevent the rigging against men. We need to restore family values and true law and order in this society.
Remove DHS.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Is it Hojati? Is that how you say your last name?
Yes.
Okay, we appreciate your time. Does the commission have any questions for him? Okay, hearing none. Thank you for your testimony. Is there anybody else on the phone that would like to give public comment at this time?
Alexander Falcone, our Nevada judges.
Okay, Alexander, can you help me with your last name again on the phone? It's hard for us.
F as in Frank, A-L-C-O, N as in Nancy, I.
Did you get that? Okay. All right, thank you, sir. You've got 3 minutes.
It was an agenda item on stipulated orders. I just had a few comments to make. Firstly, I was wanting to let you guys know, I think you all already know there's existing case law that prohibits stipulating to not being able to modify child support. It might be useful to codify that because some parents don't know. And then the other issue was stipulations are great, resolve the issue really quick, and maybe considering codifying the mandatory retroactive modification to the date of filing a motion to modify child support. It's already an existing case law that it's discretionary with the court, but I feel like mandating it would make it a lot more likely that parties stipulate and don't just run the clock just to save a few months of payments on child support. No further comment.
Okay, thank you. Does the committee have any questions? All right, hearing none. Is there anybody else on the phone that would like to give public comment?
Yeah, my name is Brian Arman, A-R-M-A-N.
Repeat your name one more time for us.
Brian Arman, A-R-M-A-N.
Okay, I'm sorry, but the phone connection's bad, and I'm having a hard time with your first name. What was your first name again?
Brian.
Is it Ryan?
Yes.
Rice?
Can you hear me?
No, if you could speak a little louder, it would help.
Sure. Brian Arman.
Brian, we've got you now. All right, you've got 3 minutes. I apologize for that.
That's all right. I think my phone. Here's my thing about the child support. Child support definitely should be enforced for the parents who doesn't want to do anything with their kids. However, unfortunately, I don't know. I think most of the states, not only Nevada, child support becomes actually a trophy, and the parents are fighting for it. Usually, always the ladies get the child support, and the kids. If you go in front of the judge always will give it. It says to go to 50-50 unless father is not fit or the mother is not fit. Any parent doesn't fit to their parent. Despite another parent's willingness to share custody, unfortunately, judges do not do that because of the connections with the lawyer or not. There are many, the things. However, even though law says in the best interest of the children, judges should make decisions, they don't. And the families are fighting just for the child support, nothing else. And child support should be enforced for the parents who doesn't want to do anything with their kids, not the parents who is fighting to share custody for their kids. That's my comment.
Okay, thank you very much. Sir, does the committee have a question for him? Hearing none, thank you. I appreciate your time, sir. Is there anybody else on the phone that'd like to give public comment at this time? All right, hearing none, we will close agenda item number 2 and move to agenda item number 3, which is approval of meeting minutes from February 9th, 2018. The minutes were provided as exhibits here. Do we have a motion for approval?
I'll move to approve them.
Second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed say nay. Motion passes. Yeah, and let the record reflect that Assemblyman Pickard arrived during the public comment. All right, we're going to move on to number 4, agenda item number 4, discussion and recommendations on the proposed child support language for a formula using the economic data about the cost of raising children. This agenda item actually, let's move on to number 5. Let's do review and approve the final language on how to calculate child support from incarcerated parent or parents recently released from incarceration. Has everybody had a chance to look at the new language, the modified language from the last meeting?
Was that language reprinted anywhere?
It was incorporated. It should have been incorporated into Judge Rob's materials.
We, at least I didn't receive, Judge Hoskin, I didn't receive any materials from Judge Rob. I don't have the new version.
Judge Rob did
or
not,
the updated version.
did not send them out, the updated version. All right, then we're going to skip that for now. We will have to table that item till the next meeting. Let's move back to number 4 then. The purpose of agenda item number 4 was for us to all run through some sample scenarios and some math and take a look at the equations that we had for child support and cross-compare that to the economic data that we have to see if we are comfortable with the percentages that we have set forth in the child support calculations. This was an agenda item proposed by Judge Hoskin. And so, Judge Hoskin, you are on the hot seat first for whether or not you ran through some numbers.
Yeah, I did try and run through some numbers. I went back through a couple of scenarios. And as I've expressed to this committee before, one of my goals is to make the final calculation as simple as possible so that both people representing themselves as well as courts and 4D enforcement can utilize it. In running through that exercise, it became clear to me that it's not going to be as easy as I hoped it would be. I do recall that Judge Robb was going to also try and simplify some things and codify them, and I was kind of hoping to incorporate that into my review. There was a document that was provided to us that I hadn't seen before, talking about child care expenses, and the totality of what I was doing was trying to wrap in child care and health insurance and all the things we've talked about adding into a child support calculation rather than deviating from that. And the problem I was running into is, depending on the income, the percentages would change to make it correct for low income, high income, which is why I'm still a little frustrated with the application of that. I was interested in Alaska when they're looking at child care expenses, that they're actually pulling it off of gross income, which would be a change in the definition of gross income if we were to incorporate that, which would allow us to simply use percentages, and perhaps we could incorporate something along those lines in. I think that would make it simpler for calculation purposes and also wouldn't affect the percentages based upon the vast ranges that we would have in the variations of both child care and health insurance that we've talked about. So perhaps that would be a simpler way of approaching it. But unfortunately, as I tried to do what I suggested that we all do, the right size order seemed to be out of reach, absent some deviation on my part to get us to that point in the end of my calculation. And I know, I'm sorry, adjustments. I've started calling it adjustments rather than deviations, have been frowned upon by the feds in order to get us to this point. So unfortunately, notwithstanding my rambling on, I'm not in any better position to say here's how we should go forward unless we're willing to take a look at incorporating child care and health insurance into the income analysis prior to applying the statutory formulas that we're going to promulgate here. In my mind, that would be a better way of looking at it than trying to add on after a percentage was put in place, simply because I couldn't, in various scenarios, come up with the right size order. So I'm happy to have a discussion with regard to what anybody else was able to do since our last meeting as well.
I'll add to another level of frustration I had when I did the numbers and I went through the math on my own. I still saw the frustration of when we have that transition between into the high income brackets, and that strange gap where, for example, if you're making $8,000 a month, your child support's $1,440, but if you make $333 more, $8,333, your child support drops down to $1,166. So and it's always right there at that bracket, that transition bracket, that you have the problems, obviously. And I don't know that ever looks fair or feels fair, that you now have $333 extra in your pocket in income, but you also had a $300 drop in your child support. Although the rationale behind a smaller percentage at the higher incomes makes sense, it's that transition period where it's not fair. I had not contemplated the same way. I think your solution, in which we move the child care and the medical insurance to the front end as part of the gross income analysis, might be a very good solution. I like it. I haven't done the math that way in my head to see. It sounds like it would work out to a much more fair calculation. And it was my concern that The reason our child support numbers came out fair before was because we had the presumptive maximums that dropped it from these percentages, and I was fearful that, when I did the math, it still ends up in some very high child support amounts that are not the right size orders. And I had the same frustration as you. I'd like to hear from the rest of the committee on thoughts about the moving childcare and medical to the front end within the gross income analysis. Any thoughts?
Keith Pickard, I'll weigh in on that. As I was, I did make a brief attempt at doing some of the math, and I just kind of personally, there were so many different competing questions that I stopped trying and thought that I'd probably come today and suggest we move to a tabular form. If that's possible, because then if we do that, the way we saw in some of the materials that we looked at a couple of months ago, I think that would make it easy for everybody. You know what your income is, and we can do that in tiers. You know what your income is, you know what the number of kids are, the two meet on the table, and that's what you pay. I think that would make it simpler for to address the pro se litigants, and frankly, it would probably cut out some of the arguments that private counsel get into. I don't know how that would affect the 4D program. With that caveat, as to I'm sorry, I lost. What was the question you just asked? I was going to weigh in on.
Judge Hoskins' concept of moving it into the gross income.
Right. I struggle with that. As I was looking at this, and I have a case right now where we're dealing with some of that, because child support itself is all over the map in terms of cost, or child care. Yeah, sorry. And so I think that's going to be problematic unless we want to decide an amount to be put in there. But ultimately, if we're limiting it just to moving it into the calculation, but allowing that to be subject to a review of what's reasonable under the circumstances and allow the court some discretion in determining what that amount should be. If that's what we're talking about, then I think I can support that. But in terms of including it in the base calculation, I just don't know how we do that and make it fair given the variability of those costs across each case.
Judge Hoskins, if I can jump in, there was a thought that I came up with when I was doing the calculations that I wanted to propose to the committee, and that has to do with child care. And we've debated over the last several meetings as to the huge variations we can have in the child care. In the January meeting, we were given some information with regard to child care costs in Nevada, and what I did was ran those numbers and kind of averaged them, and the average was about $610 a month. So perhaps we can include something, whether we do child care as an add-on to child support or take it off the front end from gross income so that we're crediting it to the party that's making those payments. We have a not to exceed amount, which if we're just looking at the numbers we got back in January would be $305 for one party and of course $305 for the other as a not to exceed, as to maybe eliminate some of those people who are spending thousands a month on child care. And my concern is that it would take us up. You'd have actual child care cost, one half of child care cost, up to $305, and then beyond that would be incumbent upon the party who decided to go above that amount to cover that. That way we're not building in an ability for either obligors or obligees to pad or increase their child support obligation beyond what it probably should be. So just something to consider in the totality of doing those numbers. But just so the record's clear, it wasn't my idea for the front end. I stole it from Alaska when I walked in today, and I hadn't thought about it before but that in my mind would eliminate a lot of the problems that we're running into. And I think it was similar with Assemblyman Pickard's concerns with regard to that. And I as well have not run the numbers, but from a calculation standpoint, it appears as though if we take it off of the gross income calculation, we're still giving credit to the party that's making those payments, and then calculating child support based upon cost of raising a child, which goes back to information we received in November, and then run our calculations based upon that. But I just don't think it's possible to build in child care and health insurance into the calculations and have it be fair across the board from infants to teenagers. And so if we're actually using that in offsetting gross income, then it appears that would solve a lot of the problems. But like Madam Chair, I haven't run those numbers yet. It just from a logical standpoint appears to be appropriate for me.
This is Kim Surratt. I'll also throw in Assemblyman Pickard. I had kind of the same thoughts about the table, at least when I was doing the math and doing the calculations. When I looked at low income, there was a relief to have that chart that we worked on, that you could look at it and go, none of those numbers look outrageous, out of control. They seem to make sense for the number of children. They, it's real easy to use. And then I moved on to the high income and went, oh, okay. We're not getting to the same results. We're not getting to that same nice, clean look at the numbers and know you're in the right range. And I'm wondering if that's where we've gone wrong with this, is that we've tried too hard to keep some of the old model, but some of the new model, versus just coming in with, this is how much our economic data tells us is needed to raise a child, and then backing out of that for the different family levels and income levels as to what their child support will be based on that economic data. Meaning it goes down for the lower income and higher income. Does it go up, or does it really just stop there? I don't know. But my relief level when, going through the numbers, looking at the low income stuff, was that we had a nice solid solution. Looking at the other levels, we've been waiting and putting this off to do the math till we made some other decisions, but now when you look at it all on one page, we're not necessarily getting to the right numbers, in my opinion.
Keith Pickard for the record. I agree completely. I thought that we've got the low income almost in tabular form. I think that tabular forms would work for that and the standard. And frankly, I think there's nothing wrong with using a formula or maybe just a direction for the high income, because ultimately I think it will decline as a percentage of gross income. That's what we know about the cost of raising a child versus income. And I don't think that we have to create a table for the high income the way we would for the other two. That also leaves more discretion in the court to accommodate consideration of other things like child care, private school if the parties have agreed to it, and some of these other things that are really, on a practical level, only available to high-income earners. And so I think that my thought, at least, was that I think it would be helpful for the majority of the cases for us to have tabular results for the low income and the standard calculation, and then use some kind of formula as an add-on to the standard table for high income instances. And that was just a thought that I had as I was trying to come up with the different scenarios.
This is Joe Sanford, and I apologize I wasn't at the last meeting, and I checked in the minutes and didn't see. Is there a base set of numbers that everyone is working off? I think it might be valuable if we had a clear representation of, I put these numbers in these situations and this was the outcome that we're seeing. Because when I looked at the numbers and ran a couple of test scenarios, and I think that in some situations our model was still working well, but in certain circumstances I was using the numbers provided for average child care costs, and if that was raising it by $305, it made the number significantly different than what we were starting, what our current 18%, 25% model was. And so I guess I just want to know if there was somebody had a set of scenarios or a consistent set of scenarios that we were all using to check our work.
No. We just all just went away and tried to, think through some different things in our head. I did a very simple, just looking at, okay, if the income was $4,000 a month, gross monthly income, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, until I got to that. And I just wanted to see what the numbers looked like and how they compared to the economic data that we had received. Again, that weird gap in moving to the high income level, where you get that shift back where you pay less for making more, and then it finally catches back up and goes to a reasonable amount. On the low income, of course, we have our chart that we were working off of, but no, we didn't have anything consistent that we were all going off of this scenario to see what it looked like.
And I also used our chart for the low income in particular because of the work at the 4D program that is usually, or at least close to a number of our cases, adding, I think, a decision on how we were going to handle child care costs as far as, if the intention was to do 50-50, your child care costs could be extreme over that, and I know the discussion was to possibly have the judge have the ability to deviate back down or to not order those total costs, but it ended up being, with those costs being way over 18% in most cases. And so I guess I was going back to our definition of what we were including in base child support and whether that original number is still reflective.
I don't know how to answer that. I think I have the same question as you. I mean, really.
So
But-
I guess I would volunteer. I hate to volunteer, but I would volunteer to perhaps create a couple of scenarios that I think are fairly representative of low income, medium income, high income users with varying child care costs, and compare that with currently what we would do if we were just getting 18%, and I guess maybe see how that reflects across those earners using. Currently, I would plan to use the data that we received on child care costs as sort of an example. I know that a lot of that was based on 75% of the median at 75%, so not exactly the median, and so it was still a little bit higher, I think, than average would really be. But if that would be helpful for everyone, and I'll try and email that out to everyone before our next meeting.
I think it's helpful. I think my concern is, at least in my scenario, I did go through what I think are some pretty average scenarios, and I didn't like the results, I guess is really what part of this discussion is. Not everybody on the committee did, I don't think. And I'm hearing from Assemblyman Pickard and from Judge Hoskin that they kind of didn't like their results either, what some of that math calculation was. And I think I agree with you, Assemblyman Pickard. I just want to kind of backtrack to one of the comments you made about having a table format that tells you exactly what your child support is up through regular incomes and low incomes. And maybe at the high income level, it's as simple as you take that average cost of living plus, and I'm just throwing this out there, I don't have a clue if it even makes sense, plus 2%. Or, of your income, just so you get that step up for that high income, which makes sense because we talk about the average cost of rearing a child goes down with the higher income, but the reality is those higher income families are living a different lifestyle, and those children do have different activities and are doing different things that, in terms of sharing between households, there should be a little different calculation there. Versus the complaint we get now where it just kind of stops at that that last bracket that we have. But in some ways,
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yeah, thoughts?
I just want to make sure that my comment was understood, that as we get into the higher tax bracket or income brackets, well, I guess they're kind of the same, but as we get into the higher income earners, that should be a curved, a sliding scale, that it's not necessarily linear, although a linear scale will be easier to calculate, but it should be a reducing amount of the percentage of income as the income goes up. So I don't know that we can add 2% necessarily for tiers, because that keeps it on an upward climb. But the math, I think, can be developed by somebody other than me, because I don't do math. But the math should be fairly easy to understand once we understand what it is we're trying to accomplish. And so I think that if we can all agree that, and there's probably something out there. I seem to remember, I just don't remember where it was, but I seem to remember something being presented to us early on that showed a reduced, a sliding scale, downward trending scale for higher income as they went up in income. At the end of the day, though, I think that at least the conclusion I came up with was just that we use tabular forms, and then, as you have stated, we add on to the higher income at a progressively lower amount as the income goes up, and a lower amount as a percentage of gross income to accommate that. Because I agree with you, as they get into the truly high income ranges, they do things that no one else does. So the children live at a very different lifestyle, and they're entitled to that. Particularly if you get one parent who is nowhere near the other in terms of what they're earning, you end up with the imbalance then in the homes.
Well, I think one of the things I'm watching out for too is that it's fine if it's not linear and it does have a curve, as long as that curve doesn't dip below how much in child support the regular income families are average. Regular is about not really the word I'm looking for, but your average income families are paying. Suddenly it's your high income, so you're paying below them. That doesn't make any sense.
Right. And that can't happen if it's an add-on.
Right.
Right? So they'll never pay less than someone in a lower income bracket, but at the end of the day, you know, if they're making, say, $500,000 or $1 million a year, we're not adding an 18%. It's not an increasing scale. That will tend to level off to a point where we probably wouldn't add anything if they went from 1 million to 2 or something like that. And I'm just using numbers as placeholders, not that I think those are the right numbers.
This is Dawn Throne.
Yes, Dawn.
Going back to what we are trying to accomplish, I think that the three-step program we've been talking about works. What doesn't work, though, and I ran numbers, is the current percentages we have, especially at 18%. 18% for one child seems to come up too high. I mean, we're accomplishing our goals of minimizing deviations, setting right-size orders by including in the formula the two items that are usually the biggest deviation factors. We include those in there, give the judge instruction on how to deal with those two costs for an individual family. But the percentages, as they stand now, are too high. That's what I found when I did the calculations.
And Madam Chair, I apologize for commandeering so much of this conversation, but I had exactly the same reaction, that the 18% seemed too high. And so as I was looking at the tables that we were given and trying to figure out in my own mind how I was going to approach the table, I decided it was above my pay grade. But ultimately, I would imagine that you can populate that table based on kind of a linear approach from one corner to the opposite lower corner, where at the top left you'd start with the minimum, and we could frankly incorporate the low income with the to use your designation, the regular income tables, or leave them out. but or leave them separate. But we could start at the top left with the minimum, and then figure out where we think the right size is at the maximum at the bottom. Top left to bottom right. And so as you go through that, it's the calculation becomes one of apportionment, where you're trying to scale across and down evenly, and that's a linear scale. And again, it's been, golly, 35 years since I was in college. So it was back in my college days I remember doing this stuff. So I know it can be done. We just need to have somebody that can do that. So I think then that simplifies our process. We figure out what our minimum is. We figure out what our maximum is on the regular scale. Just let the math fill in the blanks in between, and then we figure out what the add-on is for the high income group, and it simplifies our process.
I'm absolutely in agreement. And of course, the one day that we have this kind of a math discussion, we don't have Ellen here with us, who is our economist expert on this committee that is supposed to assist us with that kind of math and doing those kind of numbers. However, I think that we could probably reach out to Ellen after this meeting to attempt to create such a model if this committee wanted to entertain such a model. But for me, I think it's the absolute cleanest way to say we know it didn't exceed the economic data that we have on the cost of raising a child. We know it met the needs of raising a child. We know when we see that table and we see those numbers, we know exactly what they are. And we know we accomplished that goal. We know that about the low income right now when we look at, and there's still room for deviation for the court to still look at ability to pay even on that scale, but at least we know we did some appropriate.
They don't let me see that kid.
Excuse
Period.
me, if you were on the
That's
phone, you need to
$300
mute your phone.
Because that's my right.
Sir? I need you to mute your phone if you're listening on the phone, you need to mute, please. Okay. Back to what I was saying. With such a table, we'll know we're at the right numbers. We just have to have we have to know how to accomplish that. And at least, part of that is that this committee's job is to look at that economic data every 4 years to know, do we have the right numbers? Are we at the right math? Are we meeting the needs for raising children in the state of Nevada? And I don't know how we do it on that high income yet, but thoughts from other members of the committee?
Judge Hoskin again. While I don't disagree with anything you just said, I want to start with that. That's never been my problem in trying to resolve all the issues that we have before us. I think coming up with a child support obligation that appears to be correct for all these scenarios is certainly within our capabilities. When I run into problems, it's when I try and add on health care and child care and still come up with a reasonable number. I think it was Mr. Sanford that indicated that if we're doing half of what it costs for average child care, $305, sometimes that's more than the child support obligation would be. And that is what throws me off for the most situations with what I believe would be a right size order. So while I love the fact that it feels like we're moving forward and making progress on a resolution of how we're going to approach the child support, I don't think we can have that conversation completely until we figure out what we're going to do with child care and health care in a way that still ends up being right sized. And I'd love to have answers to that other than what I've already suggested, but I don't think we can avoid that.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's also kind of a greater global problem we have, isn't it? The reality is most people are facing child care bills that they can't afford to pay, that the amount of money and income they earn off of their job doesn't even come close to paying the health care bills and the child care bills. And I don't, the down and dirty is Those are needs. They have those needs, but the children have more needs than just childcare and healthcare. So child support gets added on top of that because there's still food and there's still power and water bills to be paid and other things. But those are two very expensive items. I mean, I've pitched it on this committee where I was extremely worried about childcare. I know on the lower income, it's not always the concern. There's, supplemental assistance with some of that, or it's just not something that they're seeing on the low income the same way we see it on your average income families, where being able to afford it's just outside of their means most of the time. Other thoughts on this? I mean, this is the heart of this committee at this point. I mean, this is our down and dirty calculation before we even get into all the other nuances that we picked a concept we were going to go with on how we were going to come to our calculations. And now that we have it in front of us and we're doing the math, we're not satisfied. So we need to have some deep conversations on this. Mr. Sanford?
I like the way that we're approaching it, but I do agree that I don't think that the numbers we're getting right now end up right in a lot of circumstances. And I think that the way I see that the errors coming in is like Dawn expressed, was the 18% number is the number that I guess throws it off in the most circumstances. At the higher end, it actually ended up being less of a problem because the gross monthly income was so high compared to child care costs. But for pretty much all the numbers I ran with $60,000 or below, it ended up being a pretty significant change in compared to how it's currently being done. And so going back to what Judge Hoskin, I think, said at the start of the committee is, if it's not really broken and we're already getting, and we feel like the number we're doing now is at least close to fair, and our review says that number is close to fair, can we move the 18% number down to reflect that we have taken out this healthcare and this childcare cost, and that we will be adding it back in, and to still end up with the same numbers. And it could be, I think in a certain sense, it could be done by changing the gross monthly income to be subtracted by those numbers, with obviously also a small percentage change too, because you were already talking 18% of those numbers instead of 100% is what you'd be looking at, just subtracting it off the top. But I think that I like the way that we're currently looking at calculating the child support. I think that the number that could be changed, in a certain sense, the easiest would be that 18% number, because it sounds like uniformly we don't think that's coming up with the correct solution right now. And because childcare costs are going to change each case, and because healthcare costs are going to change each case, the number that we can really change is that base percentage number. And at least to me, when comparatively, it looks like our base percentage number sort of had an idea that it was going to include some of those costs in it. And now that we've taken them out, we're essentially double charging it. And so I'm not sure what that number is going to be, but in a linear scale, like Mr. Pickard was discussing, that number will be a percentage number. We just got to calculate it in a linear scale. And so that's, I guess, my first comment. And then as far as calculating for the high income earners and the kind of cliffs that you guys were talking, I did notice in our public comments there was one solution to that problem, and I think it's very similar to how income tax is done now, where from $0 to $100,000 you pay at this percent. From the $100,000 to $150,000, your first $100,000 is still taxed, or I guess in this case, child support costed at the original percentage, and then the next 50,000 is at the second percentage, and then the next 50,000 is at the next percentage, and that way you end up with that curve, but you never have a step down. So I think the public comment version was 5% after $100,000 ended up with similar to what we had in our current percentages, but not without the cliffs. And I don't know what that 5% number is correct and what we want to go with or whatever, but I do think that, I mean, tax people have kind of already shown us a good way to do that, and so it could be, I think, added to our already existing language fairly simply to just say, instead of saying something like, if a payer's monthly income is greater than $12,500, the following percentages apply, it would be to a payer's monthly income that is greater than $12,500, the following percentage would apply. And so you would go through a couple of steps. You know, your first 100,000 would be one percentage, and then you'd add until you got to the last piece.
I like it. I also think that when I took the percentages, those percentages we had for high income, the first brackets, the 14, 20, 23, 25, 27%, that I came to much more reasonable numbers that I liked for the average income bracket. And I felt like they were a lot closer to our economic data, at least when I did that. And I think they're probably closer to what we had for presumptive maximums before, too. And I'm not in disagreement over doing that, changing that for those high-income payers. It's not to say that, Assemblyman Pickard, that we can't put those formulas in place and still have a chart. I mean, it would still net a chart at the end of the day, but that chart might give us it might assist us economically looking at it just to feel better about it. But thoughts on Mr. Sanford's proposal?
Karen has one.
This is Karen, Clark County.
Yes.
I don't know if I have a new proposal. I just wanted to weigh in on behalf of the county. I like our existing formula. I always have. But if we are going to move forward with the change, I think all the ideas presented today are very good. I feel like there's a couple of agenda items that we're discussing right now. It seems that we're discussing the percentage, which incorporates the cost of raising a child, which would be, of course, for those 18 years. But then we also have a discussion sort of going on a parallel track regarding child care and health insurance, and whether that's built into our percentage, added on top of. So I feel like there's sort of multiple conversations happening. And I don't know if this is the time to do it, but in terms of adding child care into the percentage, that is very disconcerting to the 4D program. And I know I've said this before, so I don't want to sound like a broken record, but the cost of raising a child is for 18 years, and child care it's a finite period of time. And I would venture to say it's from the time of the child's birth to maybe 6 years old when they're enrolled in school. And the problem with adding that into the formula is, as Mr. Sanford noted, we have a lot of 4D cases, and we have individuals that are not receiving any child care or private schooling. And so when we inflate the child support amount, we are dealing with individuals who cannot pay that amount. So I prefer for that to be a deviation factor for the court to consider, so the court can consider an individual's ability to pay. We are looking again at license suspension, jail time, passport, seizure of bank accounts. And so when we start taking that hard line in terms of enforcement remedies and jail time, ability to pay is crucial. So I'm very reluctant to throw child care, especially since we have a large percentage of cases that don't even have child care expenses, into the formula. And I know this committee is not supposed to look at deviation factors. We're trying to move away from that. But my vote is to not put child care into the formula. If there's any way we can get around that, that would be my vote. So that's it for me.
I have a question for Judge Hoskin, and that is simply, do we have to have it in the calculation? Can we do this as a separate thing, just as we would extracurriculars or private schools, where they are regularly addressed but not built into the child support calculation? Can we do that separately so that the court at least is going to be able to address it, but we don't get tied up with it here?
I think the easy answer to the question is, yeah, we can. And maybe I'm misinterpreting how we're supposed to be approaching this, but I guess I hadn't really thought about it that way. If we're just dealing with cost of raising children and not considering health care or child care and dealing with those separately, yeah, we could. It would make our job much simpler. Are we tasked with dealing with those? I know it's in the report. I know it's part and parcel of.
I'm going to jump in.
Well,
because,
that's
yeah, because it is part of.
It was a terrible question. How's that?
Yeah. Well, it's part of AB 278, Assemblyman Pickard, that if it goes away, then we're leaving the courts with absolutely no guidance on it. And I do feel like we are going a little bit in a circle here, because we did have some pretty strong debates about is it in the calculation? Is it after the calculation? Is it considered or not considered? I do think, in some of my comments I've made before have been that I think a good percentage of the complaints we have out there in the world is that there's not enough dovetailing between the child support obligation and the child care obligation and consideration to that. And there's not enough consistency in our state on how to deal with child care. So I still like what we have and how it's been structured from our prior meetings and our prior votes on the child care parts of it and the medical cost part of it. I don't necessarily think we have to bring it into the gross income part of it, but what Judge Hoskin was saying is just that after you calculate, you do your gross monthly income, then you calculate your child support, then you look at child care and medical, that we're getting to some outrageous numbers. But that was back to the other comment I made. Yeah, you're right. They're outrageous because child care is outrageous in our nation, and medical insurance is outrageous. And that's a greater societal problem than it is necessarily just a child support issue, but they are outrageous numbers. But we can't ignore them, and I don't want judges ignoring them. I want it to be something we contemplate and consider.
Sure, and I'm sorry, Keith Pickard for the record. I agree actually with that. And so I was thinking for the moment, the thought that came into my mind was, why don't we just separate it out? But I think still we should separate it. My thought is, I think we can separate from the table. And this goes to essentially what Joe Sanford was just saying about, removing it from the tabular portion of this and not completely ignoring it maybe. And admittedly, I was thinking take it out completely and handle it as a separate issue. And statutorily, we're required to address the health care insurance piece. And so that, I think, would prevent us from taking it out of this entirely. But I think it should be, ultimately, as I'm envisioning this from a practical standpoint, we would start with the table. Then we would look at, and maybe we give the courts guidance in how to do this and what order to do it in. But we would start with the table. This is the presumptive amount that we should be looking at. Then we look at, as part of the calculation, the overall obligation, that we look at health insurance premiums and what's reasonable there, because we also have statutory guidance as to what's a reasonable amount for that premium. And then the next step would be child care. Is there child care? If so, what's a reasonable amount? And so we just do this as a step at a time, because that still gives the court discretion. If child care really is $600, but the other side can't pay $300 more in the child support, then the court can say, look, the obligor does not have the actual ability to pay that, so we're going to add maybe $100, and it's up to the parties to find a situation where that's enough. Because then we're both right-sizing it and addressing it, but it's a separate step in the process.
Don Throne, if I can go back to Karen's comment, my understanding is you're saying that there is no child care cost involved for a lot of the 4D people. So it's just not, it would be a step that would be ignored, right?
Karen Cliff, Clark County. So it's never ignored. When we have court, we canvass the parties for any child care expenses, and should they have any, the courts provide that deviation based upon the ability to pay for the parties. Generally, I would say our hearing masters go with the 1/3 model because the petitioner gets the benefit of the tax credit. So we do consider it, but because we do have so many Nevada State Welfare referral cases, oftentimes those parties are not working and don't have daycare expenses. So my concern was, inflating the child support unnecessarily. In other words, we might be benefiting a select portion, but we might also be punishing those that don't even have daycare expenses involved in their. I don't know if that makes any sense.
I agree, but I think that's also why we have the model we've come to so far, which was, at first we talked about upping the percentage of child support to incorporate the cost of child care, but because of your statements, Ms. Cliff, we decided that wasn't a good idea because of that. And also the issue of children growing and not having child care. So instead, we have it still a consideration after you calculate child support, but telling the courts they got to consider it if it's there, if it exists. If they have child care costs, it's got to be considered by the court versus just leaving it off to the side as an option for the court to consider. But if they have it, they have the costs. And versus, and I don't think we're far off. Judge Hoskin, I don't think he's proposing that it's in every single case. You consider it on the front end, or you what was the term we were using for a while? Build it in, baked in, have it baked into the numbers on the front end. But what he's saying is just, hey, if your gross monthly income is adjusted because you have child care costs, then your child support is naturally adjusted also after the fact. Is that something that would impact the 4D programs? We did, by the way, just for the record, we lost Mr. Sanford. He had a family reason he had to leave right away. But
Judge Hoskin, let me kind of jump back in. You said it better than I did, Madam Chair, so I appreciate that. But yeah, I'm never saying that we ignore it. I'm saying we have to consider it. But I'm saying from a simplistic purpose, it may be an easier calculation both for the private bar as well as 4D if we build into our definitions of gross monthly income that the obligor's gross monthly income is reduced by the amount of child care, or half the amount of child care, however we want to deal with that, and perhaps reduced again by the amount of health insurance that's being paid. And then we run our calculations on that net of gross after we make those calculations. But if we build that into the definition of gross income, then we're including the out-of-pocket that we have for both of those obligations prior to making our calculation for the rest of care. And I know we've kind of bounced back and forth because the numbers we're looking at for cost of raising child, if I remember correctly, included health care in those costs as well. And we're kind of dancing around that because we've got contributions for low income from welfare or from other benefits that they're receiving. But I think if we approach it that way, then we're looking at both of those costs and giving people credit for those kinds of costs, and then basing child support from that point forward, and then we don't have the court having to deviate or adjust for those two because that's already built in the front end. So in my mind, that's not the baked in scenario that I was proposing several months ago, but it is a simpler way, at least in the way that I look at things, approaching it. So just if that makes it clearer for people what I was talking about from Alaska.
Keith Pickard for the record. So let me just make sure I've got this clear in my mind. What you're suggesting, and I kind of like the idea, is that this would be similar to what we do on the federal tax form in terms of the initial child exemption, where you reduce the gross income before you actually touch the tax piece. So in this scenario, we're reducing what we are calling gross monthly income by the amount of the obligor's portion of the child care and insurance costs, and then running the table from there.
That is what I'm proposing, yes.
Okay, I'd like that, actually. The thing I would want to look at again is then making sure that we're not understating the tables. But I do like that. So I apologize, I misunderstood that from your first comments, and so I can get on board with that.
Karen Cliff, Clark County, and I agree, I'm on board, but just to clarify, how do we determine what the obligor's obligation towards the child support would be, or towards the child care?
Well, and that was something that we'd have to consider. I think we've got to wrap our head around that we're okay with the idea and then hammer out the other problems. One problem that Ms. Throne raised when I was discussing this with her prior to the beginning of the meeting was that Alaska's approach is child care expenses paid by the obligor. And there certainly are scenarios where child care expenses are paid by the obligee, which would be a problem running into it. My suggestion in ironing that out, dealing with Ms. Cliff's question, would be that the child care expenses would be paid by the obligor, or half of them, or however we approach that. I don't know that we need to resolve that. But if we're basing it on gross monthly income of the obligor would need to bear those costs in order to get that reduction in the gross monthly income calculation. And the information we would receive in order to make that calculation would be the same information we receive currently, well, at least in civil domestic court, where the information is provided from the human resources with regard to the cost of insuring the child, or receipts received from child care providers in order to make that calculation.
Ms. Murray?
It's a little bit off topic. The topic's moved fairly quickly. So I was thinking of right-sized orders, and maybe there's an additional chart that tells you this is the child support piece with health and child care not to exceed a number. So you have a parallel line running that gives you, I don't know, 10% over it, not to exceed that number. I'm not sure how to say that better. If your chart says 18% of the income, then your second chart says, after we decide what the number is for child care and health care, that their obligation in order to stay right-sized has a cap at the top that says not to exceed 25% of their income, something like that.
And Judge Hoskin, again, I don't know that I'm opposed to that. In fact, that's kind of why I said we might have a not to exceed based upon what's ordinary for the state. And I think we have that information, I want to say it was from the January meeting, with regard to at least child care costs, so that we don't get into that situation where perhaps somebody is padding or getting us to that point. I'm okay with a not to exceed on either one, whether it's health care or child care, based upon the information that we've received so far, or additional information we may receive. I'm certainly open to that.
Keith Pickard again. We already have the statutory limitation on health insurance at 5%
that's in terms of what you can take out of their paycheck.
The statutory
No,
limitation, the statutory limitation on that is during the order, if the amount of your health care is less than 5% of your annual income, then it's okay to order them to carry that insurance. It has nothing to do with when you now split the family and that particular portion of it is paid by the custodial parent. The non-custodial parent may need to pay a percentage of that to her, and that might exceed his entire income. So there is nothing that says that the person that has to pay that from the other side has a percentage or not. I would do that in here and say that if you're at a lower end and it's 18%, 17%, whatever that is, that we adjust it by that table following it.
And my point was just going to be, and I agree actually with that idea. My thought was just that we have some guidance as to what those numbers should look like, and I think that if we look at that as kind of a guiding principle for how we address this, we can come up to a reasonable number fairly easily. The scenario that I am troubled by, that I see all the time, is kind of the flip side, where you've got the custodial parent, say for example, and this is just an example, but what I have in my mind, it may be easier to express this way. You've got the custodial, or the non-custodial parent is required to pay for the insurance because they are the primary breadwinner. And yet, say that individual loses his job or something and loses the ability to pay. It goes to the other side, and they go out and find the most expensive policy they can find because it's available to them, it covers everything, and then the other side has to pay an exorbitant and unnecessary amount in health care insurance. If we have something that is built in, that cap, similar to what we see in terms of what the receiving parent has to pay, that 5%, and it doesn't have to be tacked at 5, but if we have the same reciprocal kind of treatment, then I think we end up with something that is fair to everybody, and that's something we can build into the calculation.
Karen Cliff, Clark County, and I support Mr. Pickard on that, and I think that's a great idea.
Okay, I'm trying to go through some scenarios in my head because my fear is when you see these parents who, I mean, the one who happens to be paying the bill for the child care, who, the other parent gets capped at a max amount of their income, but you just happen to be the one paying the bill, you're in trouble at this point because child care is needed in order for both parties to work. That's only, in my head, I'm just going through these scenarios of people who are actually in these real life scenarios. And again, it's, you pay the child care because then, I don't have a cap problem because you're the one paying it out of your pocket. I don't know what's going to happen here with the actual scenarios, but it goes back to right size orders. I get that. Some of child support can be utilized to pay some of the child care. But I don't know. My gut's saying something's off. I'm worried about it. But I get where everybody else is getting with it. Okay, we got right-sized order. But I fear that in so many family scenarios that, okay, so it was a right-sized order, but now the parent who has to pay the child care, who didn't get enough support plus child care costs to pay it, can't pay it because the costs are so outrageous, which goes back to, are they just not going to work? Because childcare costs too much, so goes back to their incomes. I just want I don't know. I guess I'm just worried about these families that have such outrageous bills for childcare and medical too. So the scenario is the other side got capped out and they hit their cap on the medical insurance, so you don't get a fair amount of the medical insurance because they capped out. And now is it the scenario, I know what the realistic scenario is, don't cover your kids. Don't get medical insurance because you're not getting enough to help cover.
And let me kind of jump in on that. And that's realistically what I kept coming up with when I was running these calculations is the extreme examples.
Yeah.
And what happens when we have the extreme examples. And my suggestion to solve that problem is that we leave some discretion for the court to deal with those extraordinary circumstances. But to answer your question with regard to not being able to pay, I think if we clearly state that those obligations fall to the obligor and they're getting credit on their income calculation before we start calculating child support, then we don't run afoul of the ability to make sure that health care and child care are provided, because it's provided by the spouse who presumably has the money to make those payments, and then we do those calculations, and child support feels cleaner. Now, I haven't run numbers on that, and I guess my suggestion at this point would be that if we're inclined that may be a scenario that is workable, that this is our homework between now and next meeting, that we kind of run those numbers and be able to make that determination. But it depends on whether people think that's the best way to go or whether we tack it in on the back end. But every time I've tacked it in on the back end, it doesn't feel right-sized. And I feel, my gut tells me that putting it on the front end will result in a more reasonable child support obligation, will still result in the health care and the child care being paid because the obligor is getting credit for that at one point. But I'm with you, Madam Chair. I honestly haven't run those numbers because I hadn't thought about it before I walked in today.
Nova Murray, for the record, I really like the idea of putting it at the front end because it looks like you're not double dipping. You're being 18% of your total income, and then on top of that, you're taking $500 out, and you're still being charged 18% of it. So it looks good.
All right, so to summarize where I think we've gotten within this meeting, we've got the concept of move the child care and the health to the front end where there's an offset of your gross monthly income for those costs by the for the definition of gross monthly income. And 2, there was an appetite for the method that Mr. Sanford put forward for the high income, which was when you hit a certain income level, we treat it more like the taxes, where only the income that's above that income level is at certain percentages. And number 3, that perhaps the percentages that are in the current calculation are too high and we drop them down so that we get closer to our economic data. Is that a very
Keith Pickard,
brief
yes.
summary of that, of what we've talked about?
I think that summarizes it. And it raised, as you went through that, it raised one question, and that is when we're doing the deduction at the front end, are we limiting that? Are we? Is it a 50-50 split, so we're reducing it by the obligor's requirement? Or say the non-custodial parent is required to provide the insurance. And so we're reducing, say, just for number's sake, it's $800 a month. Are we going to deduct $400 up front because that's his portion, and we offset the rest against hers, or how do we deal with a division of that in that calculation?
And to address that, I don't know. That's one of the reasons that I suggested that we probably run these numbers. And as I've explained it, it could be the whole thing. It could be a portion of it. It looks like Alaska is the entirety of it because the obligator is paying for it. Obligor is paying for it. But I don't know that we're in a position today to answer that question. But I think it is a question that must be answered before we resolve this. I just don't know that we're in that position today. But along those lines, since I've been dealing with the gross income definition, I'm happy to play with it and present a version which does deal with this, with the options for the committee to decide whether it's half or full or some percentage portion based upon income comparisons when and if we get to that point.
Okay, thank you, Judge.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh. Karen Cliff, Clark County. The statute regarding the 5%, if health insurance costs exceeds 5% of respondents' gross monthly income, it's considered unreasonable. Is that in a different statute or one that we're looking at? Because otherwise that would affect.
It's in ours.
We
did that research once before to make sure.
Yeah, that's right.
And we do have it currently in our health information. We don't want to lose the definitions and all that we worked on the health insurance where we made modifications to get to the right spot. So we want to keep all that work, even with this change on how it's calculated. And that 5%, that language also needs to stay in there for sure. And it's
Are
federal,
we
yeah.
keeping the 5? We're keeping 5, correct?
According to Ms. Murray,
Or
it's
no?
federal at 5, so.
Okay, so that makes it a little easier when we're considering front end on the, okay.
Yeah, and in the work, all the work we put into the definition of health insurance and the minor changes we made into all that, we need to not lose any of that work as a result of just the shift of how it's dealt with in the calculation. And then,
Just to make,
yes, go ahead, Judge.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to make sure that I'm clear. What I'm talking about is making the adjustment in the definition of gross monthly income so that we're considering it rather than affecting anything else that we've done. Is that
Correct.
everybody else's thought? Okay.
But at this time, in terms of our work product that we currently have, we have it after the calculation. So, yes, I agree. That goes on the front end as to the determining gross monthly income. So if you'll work on that, I will ask Mr. Sanford to work on his version of how to deal with a high income calculation. So we can take a look at that, incorporate that. And he's not here, so it's really easy to put his name on it. He volunteered. And I will volunteer to run a couple of basic scenarios for different income levels using different percentages and kind of create something easy for us to look at to see where we want that percentage to land in order to get to our economic data or feel like it's close to our economic data, just on the straight percentages, not dealing with healthcare, not dealing with child support, just straight, this is your income, this is your percentage, and run some different scenarios on different percentages for us.
Karen Cliff, Clark County. Just
Yes.
wanted to clarify, I know we were looking at the Alaska model and the front end and child care expenses that are paid by the obligor. I find in our program that it's the primary custodian that's paying the health insurance and the child care. A lot of times the parties have a disconnect in terms of communication. A lot of times the non-custodial parent has very little visitation with the child, has never seen the child. They are not in a position to pay the child care, but the petitioner is paying it every month. And so how open is the committee to, I don't know, in doing the calculation, considering that it's the primary custodian that's paying the daycare, knows where the child's going to daycare, knows when he or she changes facilities?
Well, my thought, and admittedly I haven't thought about it for long, would be that would be an obligation of the obligor. And we give them credit of it on the front end, but they don't get credit unless they're actually paying for it. So I think by definition, it would have to come in on the back end. The question I think that needs to be answered is, are we calling that additional child support? Are we calling that something else? It is an issue that I hadn't considered fully till the end, but I think we all probably need to process it.
And Karen Cliff, Clark County. So this is sort of the other component is when you have that initial hearing, which is, we do easily probably 40 cases a week, the initial hearing, and it's the first time that the individual finds out they're the father. And the petitioner does come in and she does express that she has daycare costs or health insurance costs. And so the obligor is not providing the cost because the obligor didn't realize for 3-4 years he was the father. So that's sort of a difficult situation because at that initial hearing, whether it's in family court or our court, child care is not being paid for because it's the first time they've realized they have an obligation. So we're just going to sort of need to mentally go through this,
I'd venture to say, Judge Hoskin, I know you said Alaska just talks about it that way, but I can't imagine they're ignoring the other end of that within their calculations somewhere in their language.
And what I was going to say is I'm certainly willing, as part of what we're doing here, to take a look at ways to solve those problems and be ready to present them at our next meeting.
Done. Solution. All right. Thank you, Judge. Appreciate your time. And like I said, I'll run down some lower percentages and different scenarios. I will ask Mr. Sanford to help with that high income calculation idea that he had, and we will get this compiled. Before we move on to some other agenda items, Joy, I wanted to ask you, I know Judge Robb did not provide us with the revised full document, but I know bits and pieces were provided, but I didn't see them out, like the definitions that I had provided of serial parenting. But when I provided it to you and Judge for her to incorporate, but also to you for the committee, did it not go out to the committee? The definition, that definition sheet of serial parenting? Okay. So I think we have a huge problem with our agenda because I know there were several items that were completed by committee members that our staff just had some confusion because it was provided to Judge Robb for the main document, but it should have also been provided to the entire committee. And I don't believe it was. So we have quite a few items on here that were based on us discussing final language that has been composed based on edits from the last meeting. So we will have to skip several of these items. But we do have a couple items we can still talk about on the agenda. And one of them would be, and actually I should probably backtrack a little bit. When we did public comment, I did not put on the record that we did have a document provided to the committee by Marshall Willick titled Volume 32, How to Calculate Child Support with Multiple Families. Technically, that is a form of public comment from Mr. Willick to the committee and was provided to the committee both by email and also copies were provided at this meeting. We could, does anybody have any comments they want to make about Mr. Willick's public comment on how to calculate child support with multiple families?
Keith Pickard for the record. I actually think that as I went through that, it's a workable solution to that particular problem. I don't, at least in my, and I haven't done a lot of them, but in my attempts, I haven't come up with anything better than what he's proposed. So if there's a way to put that on the agenda for consideration, I would move to do that.
Okay. I do believe we have an agenda item to cover this. Technically, serial parenting, agenda item number 10, it covers this. So we can discuss this under agenda item number 10. And did anybody else get a chance to review Mr. Willick's proposal on that? Or I'm sure we all reviewed it, but does anybody else have any more comments? I agree, Mr. Pickard, that it's a workable option. Of course, the way it's laid out for us is a full explanation of everything and the full background, which I expect no less from Mr. Willick ever. But we do need to work it into an actual, more statutory type language that we can work off of in order for it to be usable for us. Mr. Pickard, do you want to do that?
Actually, what I will do is I will hand that to Mr. Willick.
Mr. Willick
and
to
ask
do?
him to do it. Not only does he like doing that stuff, but my guess is he's already done it. My understanding is that was, and the way it's been described to me by those that have worked with him in the past, is that he encounters a problem, he addresses the problem, he puts that in his brief, and then he writes a paper about the problem and how he solved it. So my guess is he could give us a real live answer to that in very short time. So I will take that up.
I absolutely agree with you that that is the most likely scenario. And I appreciate you taking the time to do that. Next, we do have Judge Hoskin, the document that was handed out with the gross income definition, was that from you?
Yeah, that was the revised from the last meeting that I forwarded to you and to Judge Robb for incorporation into the totality.
Okay, so that one did make it out, and we have the definition of gross income.
And essentially, that is simply what we agreed to last time with the changes made.
Correct. I'm trying to figure out which agenda item we're under for this. I apologize. We have to stick to our open meeting law requirements for me to figure out what we're speaking under. It's technically under our definition of child support. Well, do I not have gross income on here? Doesn't look like it.
Madam Chair, I'm
Yes.
not sure that we need to even deal with it. We already approved it at the last meeting.
I don't think so either. I think it's just for
Okay.
incorporation into our final work. Okay, the next agenda item I'd like us to discuss right now is agenda item number 15. Discussion and recommendations regarding emancipation of children and self-adjusting orders. I know this has been a hot topic this week a little bit on the family law listserv for the State Bar of Nevada, ongoing issue within the state. I did have one attorney reach out with a proposal on it, and and I'm not saying it's the right proposal. It's just something that was thrown out there because I know we have kind of gone in circles on this topic a little bit and never really gotten to a good conclusion on it. One of the suggestions stated, would it be possible to have orders say something along the lines that at such time as the older child emancipates, the support is automatically adjusted based on current income and formula, but if parties are unable to stipulate and have to litigate, the prevailing party shall be awarded his or her fees. Right now, it is a trap for the unwary, which shouldn't be the goal of the law. And I also have the same perspective of I can't stand the thought of it not self-adjusting or doing something for these people who just are not savvy enough to go in front of the court, get themselves there, and have there be a windfall for the parent who's receiving the support. Other comments from the committee on the issue of emancipation? Ms. Baker, I know you have some thoughts.
So the idea of self-adjusting actually appeals to me. However, I think there's a problem with trying to get actual income. I think we could look at what the income was that was calculated when the initial order was developed, and then we could self-adjust because we have that figure. But at least in the 4D realm, we have a very hard time getting current income figures from people. So I think it would be really hard to realistically adjust to current income.
Karen Cliff, Clark County, just to add to what Ms. Baker's saying, we've been thinking about self-adjusting orders in our program for as long as I can remember. So we have a few issues. One, we would need to check with Ms. Murray. Will the new state program, state computer system be able to do this? Because again, the emancipation date of a child is unknown oftentimes. Now, our program does send out verification of emancipation, which, as we know, is high school graduation or 19, whichever occurs later. So we have to be able to enter in the data into the computer to get a firm emancipation date. And again, it fluctuates because is it 18? Did they graduate? Are they going to, an additional year of schooling? And then when you finally have that date and you know the date, let's presume our system is then able to, our new system is then able to notify the caseworker. In our office we have over at least 200, to then identify that this case has a child that is about to emancipate. Now, at what point, how early before the date of the emancipation is our office then instructed or obligated to then contact the petitioner or the respondent, because it could be a Wright v. Osborne case, to gather the income from both parties? And as we know, at least in our program, as Ms. Baker pointed out, they don't provide the income. And as Ms. Murray knows, we don't have access to work number right now. So we have a difficult time assessing the income. So it puts our program in a real hardship when we're obligated to now adjust the support despite either party motioning to do so. So that's my position on it.
Judge Hoskin, if I can weigh in, I actually had the opportunity of discussing this with one of my colleagues on a 5.5-hour drive last week. And the problem as I see it, or at least as I understand it, I have a way of doing it that I don't have a problem with, which is not unusual for me in the way that I approach things. That being said, the concern, I think, is the provision that doesn't allow retroactive modification of child support obligations, and perhaps some courts looking at that and saying, if you didn't come ask me for it, then you don't get it. If we were able to put something in there that indicated that the court had the ability upon presentation to be able to make those adjustments at the time of the emancipation, would that solve the problem for the bar, or is there more to the problem than what I'm looking at?
And I'm sorry, just to add one more thing, Karen Cliff, Clark County. It's not always a windfall. When the order's set, it could have been 10 years ago. In that time period, the respondent's actually making substantially more. And the reason they didn't motion for a modification is because they know that 25% is still a lower amount or a higher amount than him having paid 29%. So there's a whole strategy involved, and it's not always a windfall.
And I apologize for using the word windfall. It's essentially an adjustment that you'd be able to make or not be able to make based upon that retroactive prohibition of modification. But in my mind, at least the way that I approach these, if the obligation doesn't exist, then the obligation doesn't exist. Or if that change needs to come into play. And the way I typically deal with it is the party that would benefit the most is the one that we would look to be looking to gain something from the system. And if we have an ability to make those adjustments back to the time of the change of circumstance, then at least in my mind that would solve the problem, unless I'm not completely understanding the problem.
And I'll correct on the record. I am the one that used the windfall language, but I often see a windfall to somebody. So, but it's both scenarios that need to be dealt with. Yes, they could have gone in on a modification on the language or on the income level, the change of income and the change of child support. But I feel just as bad for the people who haven't done that, who could have been gaining more child support through that duration also. This lack of public knowledge on what to do with it is always problematic, and it's an education issue. But go ahead, Ms. Baker.
Kathleen Baker for the record. So the emancipation cases that I've been seeing, and we're trying to, at least I'm trying to talk to people ahead of time before they come into court. But there are two possible scenarios that I run into. And sometimes I've had people come in that have had two children emancipate, one 2 years ago, one 6 months ago, and then we're looking at what would have happened if we'd modified back then based on the income that the original order was entered on. And if there are arrears owed by the non-custodial parent, then that tends to not be so much of a problem because money keeps coming in to the custodial parent. The real problem is when they're at a zero balance, and then all of a sudden they get credited with, I don't know, $10,000 or even $5,000, and to have the custodial parent who's still raising other children then go for a significant period of time without support that they need to meet those children's needs is kind of the conundrum that we face with this. So in Washoe County right now, we're trying to do per child orders. It's true that they are not necessarily going to be based on what the income is at the time that the child emancipates, but at least it's an attempt to try to keep people from coming in and all of a sudden the custodial parent leaving with no money for who knows how long. So it's 4D, it's not those who have higher incomes, but it's a significant problem in many of those cases.
This is Don Throne. There's also an equal protection issue because the orders are self-adjusting. If you only have one child you're paying for, that child emancipates, your obligation's done. But if you have more than one child, you don't get the automatic adjustment. And then the other problem is a notice problem. If we made it mandatory that if you have multiple children, you put it in the court order that says it's your obligation, if you're the payer, to come back to court. Then they'd at least be on notice, and it's their fault if they don't.
Kathleen Baker for the record. I did not see this language, and I'm trying to find it. My associate, Carrie Cordisco, saw some language in an order that basically did put people on notice. It said, you are responsible for coming in to do a modification. If you do not do that, you may find yourself in a position where you could have been owed money, but you've basically waived your right to do that. So instead of putting it on the courts and the 4D agencies, it puts it on the parties that if they want to make a change, they have to come in and do it, or they're stuck with the results.
Judge Hoskin, I don't think we quite got to the conclusion or anybody really commenting on your proposed solution of ability to make retroactive orders to modify to the date of change of circumstances, quote unquote, date of emancipation. Is there any heartburn over that within this commission? Anybody?
Karen Cliff, Clark
Yes.
County, just what Ms. Baker said. The problem with the retroactive modification is it could result in a huge credit balance.
In the credit balance
Because if
issue.
you use, yes,
How often is that occurring?
In most of the cases that I've had,
yeah.
the non-custodial parent has arrears. So it's in some cases they have credit. I had one case where the court master actually set it up so that the full credit wouldn't be exhausted immediately, but there would be a certain amount of money that would continue to go to the custodial parent, and then there would be a credit for a percentage of the money for a period of time. It was creative. It kept the custodial parent getting some money and also helped to get rid of the credit. But it happens a lot.
Well, and the reason I asked the question is because I believe there's a judicial fix for that. I don't know, at least I'm hoping none of my hearing masters are saying, all right, you don't owe any child support for years because you have a credit. There may be an adjustment on the monthly obligation, but I think that's a judicial fix that we can certainly deal with. But if it's a small minority and this language permitting the court to retroactively modify based upon the change of circumstance or emancipation, and include a notice provision, if we want to put it that way nobody can come in and make those arguments, does that solve it?
No, and also, I would add to that, we don't have to draft language that says that it's automatically retroactive, but it's discretion of the court and ability to make it retroactive would hopefully take into consideration circumstances like the credit issue. I would hope, but
Kathleen Baker, for the record, I think I'd want to make certain that we weren't running afoul of the federal regulations, which also prohibit retroactive modification.
See, and in my mind, it never has been a concern, and maybe the Supreme Court will tell me that I've been wrong all these years. But in my mind, there was a change of circumstance that occurred, which gives me the ability to make some changes to it. So nobody's accused me of ringing afoul yet. Doesn't mean that I'm right. The Supreme Court tells me all the time that I'm not. But it's possible that is still acceptable. I can't imagine the Fed saying, no, you've waived your right for modification for an obligation that didn't exist during that time frame. But my guess is my colleagues are saying I can't retroactively modify under any circumstances, which is why we're running into those circumstances.
gotta love the moments where there's crickets. When the feds say no retroactive orders on child support, but we can go back 4 years on child support when an order hadn't been put in place, that's not afoul of that?
Kathleen Baker, for the record. I think the issue is that we have, when a child support amount is due, it becomes a judgment as operation of law. So if we have an order, it's a court order, it hasn't been modified, it says you are to pay $1,000 a month, and they pay it, or it becomes a judgment each month, then we're going back and we're changing that amount and maybe looking at different figures. I think that's a retroactive modification.
But
the judgment was incorrect at the time.
Retroactive unless we're saying that we can put in those orders that it's self-adjusting, right, on that date. And if all it is an issue of they didn't go through the technical steps they had to go through to get it adjusted on the wage garnishment or whatever is happening through the DA's office, I mean, can we break this apart into two pieces where the order has to tell people, you need to do this, you're on notice that it's self-adjusting, and if you continue to collect child support on a self-adjusting order on emancipation at a higher level than you're supposed to, you're on notice. That's a problem. I mean, I think personally think a lot of those parents know they're collecting more child support than they should, and they're holding their breath, hoping the other parent doesn't catch on what to do with it. That's, at least in the scenarios I see in my office, I've seen those. But
Karen Cliff, Clare County, when we say self-adjusting, what income are we using? The income at the time the order was set, which would be a great disservice to a primary custodian, or are we using the income at the time that the child emancipated? What does it adjust to?
Well, and that's the issue. I mean, you always have the right to go in for an adjustment in child support. Ms. Baker and I were discussing, is it, do you just drop that percentage between how much it would have been had it been one child versus two children? Per child orders, obviously, is part of the solution. No, I get that it could be unfair at that point based on what the incomes are, but why, let's take it another extreme. What if the order said, you will not receive more child support upon one of these children emancipating unless you show up in court and get the proper amount of child support put in? That parent who's receiving is going to show up in court to figure that out versus the other parent, being the one that's paying, being the one that's continuously is the one damaged by this. That has to pay a big amount and continue paying that big amount unless they make it into court. I get that we're constantly trying to protect the parent who's the recipient of the child support, but I think it goes both ways. It's why can't you go the extreme other direction with it? I know I'm being harsh with that right now, and I know it's kind of extreme comments, but there's got to be a fairness somewhere in the middle of that. It's, okay, well, if you just automatically adjust it and it's not the right amount of support because that's not the amount of income they're making at that time, so it's not fair. Well, it's not fair that no one went to court to fix this on either side. And there shouldn't be a win on either side of it. So I don't have a problem with the judges having the ability to retroactive modify. I think they should take into consideration parties who waited far too long to get into court, who might have credit adjustment issues. I think that should be within the discretion of the court to deal with. But I still don't see the problem with the court having the ability to retroactive modify upon the change of circumstances, like Judge Hoskins presenting.
Kathleen
Keith
Baker for the
Pickard
record. Go ahead, Mr. Pickard.
Thank you. I think I made this comment when this came up before, but I personally believe that it's incumbent upon both parties to affirmatively step in and ask for a modification based on that change, if that change occurs. I think that it's perfectly okay, in my mind anyway, to do self-adjusting orders based on the income at the time the order is made, and then leave it on either party to come back to court to prove otherwise. I think that whether it's in the 4D program or in the private cases, when the case comes back in for another reason, it's always open to them to do that. And so if it's self-adjusting and the recipient parent doesn't want to go to the effort of reviewing that, then they waive their right ultimately to do so, at least not on a permanent base going forward, but at least for the moment, they have waived the right to review it, and it just self-adjusts. Similarly, if the other parent, in your extreme scenario, it goes to zero, if nobody comes back in, they've waived the right, at least for the time being, until they do. At least they were put on notice. So I agree that, in my view, that really is the right way to do it. You base the adjustment because you need to put it in the order. You need to be specific in order to allow contempt to attach. And then if a change comes up later, you address that. You have the duty to address that, or you waive it.
Kathleen Baker for the record. And I think that's fine and certainly possible in those cases that are not being collected by the state. But I think that Ms. Cliff basically brought forward that we don't have the ability, at least now, I don't know about our new computer system, which isn't going to be in place for quite some time, is going to be able to do self-adjustment. Somebody actually has to go in and change the amount of what that order, there's a new order. They load it, it changes the amount that's being collected, it changes the amount that's being paid, and the amount that's going to be garnished out of wages. And we don't have, I don't think we have the ability with our current system to do anything like that. So those folks who are paying to skidoo are not going to have the benefit of that self-adjusting order.
In my response to that would be, that's very different to say, for example, we put in the order, you have a duty of notice to the DA's office for that self-adjustment when that time comes, versus hoping they get into court for the actual modification of child support on their own upon emancipation for a court order to make it happen. It's a lot easier for people to give you guys notice than it is to deal with the court system. And if they have that duty of notice to you, I mean, we have duties of notice on other things within our statutes, then they waive it. Like Assemblyman Pickard was just saying, I don't have a problem with that. When you're very clear in the order, this is the step you will take in order to get it adjusted when your child emancipates. That's an easy step for that to happen for them. And then also give that court ability that when people don't do it, they've got some retroactive ability. But there was a little bit of conversation in there about after so much time you waive it. I agree. At some point, come on, your kid turned 18 and he's now 21 and you're just now complaining that it's never been modified. At some point, the duty's got to go on to you. Judge, do you have your hand on the button? It looks like you do.
I really wish you couldn't see that as I'm thinking it through. As you're saying that, I think it's what we're talking about is semantics and a drafting problem. My suggestion is that we make it clear that an obligation ceases upon emancipation, and nobody's going to know exactly when that is better than the parents are. So they're the ones with that obligation, and give the courts the ability to look at retroactively modifying based upon that emancipation, but also the discretion to make fair determinations based upon the actions or inactions of the parties at the time they come through there. I'm not suggesting that the 4D program would be mandated to adjust them without the information coming in from either the obligor or the obligee, just like I wouldn't expect that for somebody in a civil domestic case. I'm just suggesting that the language deal with it, indicate that it's the understanding that once the child support obligation ceases, it ceases. Party's obligation to come to court, either court, to request that modification and give the court the ability to retroactively modify and the discretion to make adjustments based upon good cause. That's what I'm suggesting.
Kathleen Baker
Karen
for the record.
Cliff, Clark County. Love it.
Go ahead, Ms. Cliff.
Just that I agree.
I was actually going to concur with you, Judge Hoskins. I think that one of the things that I hear from people all the time is that they thought it automatically adjusted already. I can't tell you how many people say that when I talk to them. I've also found, because I concur, at the time somebody emancipates, your obligation to support that child ends. But I found when I talk to people and I explain that usually the people will agree to make some adjustment. So it's an issue of understanding and education of the parties. And I think if the parties are clearly noticed about what their obligation is, and we allow the court to make the changes, that is a great answer to this dilemma.
Okay, so Ms. Baker, I do believe this has been one of your agenda items since the moment we started this committee. Will you volunteer to prep some language consistent with the discussion we just had?
I will do my best. I need to notice that I have a family emergency which could call me away at any time and could interfere with that, but I will certainly do my best to draft some language to that.
And I'm happy to work with Ms. Baker if she wants the assistance based upon her circumstance.
I would love the assistance.
Okay. We have that task assigned to Ms. Baker and Judge Hoskins.
Just so we know that it's Ms. Baker's duty to notice me when she wants my assistance rather than going the other way.
You can't read my mind.
Okay. Beautiful. Let's move on to agenda item number 17, discussion and recommendation regarding self-determination and stipulated orders. We've had brief discussions about this at the beginning of our commission, and we didn't go back to it, but I know, I'm going to put you on the hook again, Ms. Baker, because I know this was one of your topics also that you were interested in, and I also, I have belief in it too, as far as an agenda item.
So in my office, we are requested frequently to draft stipulations that adjust child support amounts for parties. And oftentimes, they want to make adjustments that are not in compliance strictly with the statute. And it's very difficult. I try to work with them on that and try to find an appropriate deviation factor that will allow them to not comply completely with the statutory requirement of 18% or 25%. And to me, as long as there's no duress and the children's needs are being met, at least within the court setting, I believe that people should be able to talk about what their child support obligation should be toward each other with those conditions, versus saying this absolutely has to comply 100% with the statute.
Keith Picker for the record. My concern as I address these, and it comes up frequently in my experience as well, there's often an imbalance of power in the bargaining process, and it's almost impossible to identify that, and I would have to I would hate to have some evidence sufficient for a showing in an evidentiary hearing. It's just not there. I'm not qualified. I don't have experts ready to opine as to coercion and that sort of thing. And then aside from that, how do you and there was just some sidebar comments. How do you address changing that? If we don't have a number to tie it to, they may have stipulated to it, but that agreement may fall apart in a year or two, and now we have nothing to tie that back in terms of determining whether or not the 20% threshold has been met. So those are two concerns in my mind.
Kathleen Baker for the record. One of the deviation factors I've looked at, because I think it's the one that really applies, is relative income. So we have parents who make different amount of money, and the custodial parent may be better off financially at the time of the agreement, that he or she does not require the non-custodial parent to add a lot more money into the pot, so to speak. And the relative income actually would allow her then to come back, or him to come back and say, my income situation has changed, therefore we need to modify this. And I think that's the problem, is when people enter into stipulations, and they do it quite frequently in my office. I don't know what happens in Clark County, but they're submitted, they're signed. 6 months later, they're back in court, and the judge is saying, well, what's changed from this stipulation? And it's often very hard to identify that. So perhaps the answer is to give some more flexibility to allow for that, so that you can show there's a change of circumstances significant enough to modify in court if they've done an agreement outside.
So let me see if I understand. And I'm thinking, again, in terms of an example. Are you suggesting that this would give the recipient, say the recipient stipulated to X amount that didn't meet the technical requirements, because she had or he had a certain amount of income, and so they didn't need as much added to their pot, and then their income changes, now they need more, and that would give them the avenue to go back in and ask for more?
That seems to be the scenario that I have seen most. But I've had people in court say, you know, I don't want the other parent to pay this much money. I don't need it. That parent spends a lot of time with the children, really takes care of them. And it still doesn't quite fit into all of the standard deviations, but they're very clear. I want to stick with the prior amount. I know that income's, gone up and I'm entitled to more. I don't need more, I don't want more right now. And it seems to me if they don't need more and they don't want more right now, that they should be able to do that.
Sorry, Judge Hoskin, for the record, we're kind of relying on, in Ms. Baker's analysis, deviation factors that are getting them to the point of the stipulated order, which my understanding this committee is working to eliminate and have just a few adjustments. So I think that changes the analysis that we're making on the stipulated orders, and maybe we won't be able to get to that point, and maybe that's the reason we're talking about it at this point in time. But I'd hate to make a decision based upon old law when we're changing the law and those deviation factors aren't in existence anymore.
Well, we still have some deviation factors. We're not getting rid of them 100%. I mean, we still have consideration in our language. Let me pull it over, as to other factors to be considered. And we're not getting rid of them 100%. We'll never be able to get rid of them 100%. And it's at the very end, under F, where the child support obligation may be further adjusted by the court pursuant to the specific needs of the child and the economic circumstances of the parents based upon the following factors. And of course, the last one is relative income of both parents. But I think where Ms. Baker's going with this is that we also have the public policy of you cannot stipulate to zero. That is an impossibility, improper under our public policy, and we're not going to allow it. And a lot of parents get told that all the time. And I 100% do not want to discount the duress part of it, because that is I think the biggest reason for not allowing it. Or as I always tell my clients in the consults, it's not yours to waive. It's your child's. Your child gets the child support. That's the best way I can explain that. But sometimes it makes a hell of a lot of sense with their circumstances and those parties sitting in front of me that, yeah, you don't need the child support. And that parent has enough respect for the other parent to say, that other parent needs that money. I don't need it. That parent needs it. And we can't do that for them without being really, really, really creative with the deviation factors and trying to get as close as we can of saying, oh, well, they're actually paying these debts on behalf of the child, and that's offsetting the child support. I mean, we're really just beating around the bush to what the reality is, which is they're stipulating to a smaller amount of child support. I mean, I'll throw my own personal experience out there. I have a joint custody scenario, 50-50, amazing ex-husband. I pay child support, and I pay less than what was originally calculated because I took all the debt out of the divorce. Does that make sense? Sure. But we had to be really creative to get there. Why should we be when we agree? We're on the same page. We shouldn't have to be that creative. We should allow people to do what they need to do. Although the court needs to be able to be aware of duress. Does it take experts for that, Assemblyman Pickard? I think that, no, not necessarily. I mean, I think most DAs can sit and look at somebody most of the time and realize immediately if they're under duress, and just saying that they won't take child support because they're scared. I could be wrong, but I think you have a pretty good gut feeling for it. There's my soapbox. Go ahead.
Oh, I understand completely, and I agree. I mean, there have been many times I have sensed that my client was really pushed into the agreement, and I don't have the tools as an advocate to make a decision for both of them. That's up to the judge. How do I give that to the judge and present company excluded? I find a lot of resistance from judges to consider these kinds of comments or allegations absent some proof. So many times stipulations, particularly those made on the record at the time, you're in the courtroom and the judge is saying, well, are you guys in agreement to this? And I know my client doesn't want to do it, but she says yes or he says yes, and I'm stuck. So that was my comment. That, you know, I think coercion is certainly an active part of some of these negotiations. I just don't know how we address that without the expert.
Judge Hoskin, maybe I'm not understanding what the suggestion is, or maybe there hasn't been a suggestion made yet. Is the suggestion that we permit stipulated orders without having to deal with deviation factors? And if the answer to that is yes, then should we be concerned about the modification, or should we just be concerned about the fact that they're able to stipulate without dealing with deviation factors?
I think the issue is more about how paternalistic are we going to be? Are we going to say to the parties that are meeting with us in the 40 agency or that are in front of the court, you do not get to make the decisions for your family about how money is going to be allotted? And I realize, I mean, I've had cases where there's clearly been domestic violence which hasn't necessarily been recognized by everyone in the courtroom. And clearly, any adjustments made are under severe duress. I can usually see that. But I've also had people who say, I don't want the court to have to tell me what to do. And we do this in mediation with custody, with people who say, we want to make our own decisions about how our children are, where they're going to be and how they're going to spend their time. And we should allow them the ability to make that decision about their finances as well. And sometimes they're going to make bad choices.
My office does a lot of mediation, and we've had a dramatic number of joint petitions come into our office that were denied based on this issue because the parties came up with their own creative world that made sense to them in a joint petition where they got along and they got everything done all on their own without any court interference, and they don't know how to fix it. And they've come into our office to figure out how to fix it because now they're stuck with court telling them no. And those scenarios don't make sense to me. And I do think that without the deviation factors, a judge should be able to sit there and look at that scenario and go, yeah, good, rubber stamp, that's what you want. It makes sense. And I agree with at what point you can stress about the modification down the road, but I don't know what good is that going to do you.
This is Dawn Throne. Maybe one of the things we could do is say, yes, you can stipulate to whatever you want, but make them put in their current gross monthly income. That way, when it comes back in front of a judge for a modification, they know where the starting point was.
Just had a duh moment. Of course, that makes great sense. I love that suggestion.
Yeah, and I forget the case name, but the Supreme Court told us exactly that. We've got to make those findings so that we can do it in the future.
This is Karen Cliff from Clark County. I feel for Ms. Baker. I understand her sentiments. We do a tremendous amount of stipulations in Clark County. We can't not with a 54,000 caseload. Plus we have the EDCR that requires us to reach out unless it's futile or otherwise. So that's the first line. So we deal with a tremendous amount of stipulations, and we do have parties that agree. Maybe a petitioner that wants to take $200 off of her child support amount because respondent takes them for 2 days a month. And I get it, but it's cleaner when we have a number in there. And I know we can worry about modifications down the road, but the reality of it is, given a caseload of our magnitude, you will have a percentage of these coming back. And we always put gross monthly income in our orders, even if they come to an agreement and we have to creatively use deviation factors. There's always a gross monthly income in there. There's always a percentage in there. Your 20% change is going to happen down the road, and the gross monthly income isn't going to help putting it in the order, because will the 20% change result? We're looking at the child support amount. And so it's a great disservice to our parties if we can't facilitate them holistically, from establishing an order, from modifying an order, from enforcing an order. It's something that I think as a committee, we have to be holistic in our approach. I don't think we can look at one approach and say, that looks great, that's a Band-Aid, but then down the road, we can't adequately modify these cases and we end up in the Supreme Court because we didn't make the proper findings and we didn't assess a 20% change. I support the idea, I'd like to do it, but I think we need to be made comfortable with the idea, which might require some draft language or something where we can get from point A to point B comfortably. And that's how I feel.
Keith Pickard for the record. I don't disagree with, I disagree on occasion with Ms. Cliff, but this isn't one of them. I really think that to keep this clean, we should require of every order findings that detail the specifics for purposes of modification in the future. And I also deal with, in my cases, parties that want to stipulate. I always get the question, Madam Chairman, just as you do, and my response is very similar to yours. You know what? You can't waive it. It belongs to the child. That said, there are some deviation factors that if we can figure out a way to use them, we can agree that this is the appropriate number. And I think that since we will be maintaining some, if not all, of the deviation factors, well, not all of them, some of them don't make sense, but we will be creating deviation factors, and so maybe this is a discussion for those deviations or those factors that we come up with to give them the ability to stipulate to something and stay within the confines of the guidelines. But I think that's probably where this should be done, is in the deviation side at the very end after we've come up with everything else.
Ms. Throne, would you mind trying to help us with some initial language, or maybe look at and see if there are any other states that have this self-determination type language as a starting point for us?
Yes, I can do that.
Okay, and with your gross monthly income requirement in there too that you brought up. And that'll get us started on it. I think Assemblyman Pickard, yes, we've been able to get people out of their obligations by being really creative with the deviation factors, but not all judges are consistent on it, which brings us full circle to why this commission's in place, to help deal with some of those issues and let people get there without, especially when they're both on the same page and they have to jump through a whole bunch of hoops to get there.
And Madam Chair,
Yes.
Judge Hoskin took personal offense to your calling him inconsistent, even though the rest of us would wholeheartedly agree.
I said some judges. I did not say Judge Hoskin. Nice try, Assemblyman Pickard. All right. So with that assignment, Ms. Throne, we're going to move on to agenda item number 18. And I don't know if we have any recommendations for this today. We had with our heavy discussion of really kind of rearranging how we're even calculating child support, we may not be ready for it yet. But does anybody on the committee have any discussions to add to agenda item number 18, which is discussion and recommendations regarding consideration of community property income when calculating child support? Are we ready for this topic?
Keith.
Does anybody have any input on it yet?
Keith Pickard, for the record. I think we resolved that when Judge Hoskin proposed his definition of gross income. That was included. So I think that's been put to bed. If I recall correctly, we adopted that language. So I think that's done.
That was my recollection as well, unless there's something else. That was the only thing that I think we were dealing with, was whether it was personal injury stuff, and we incorporated all that into the definition of gross monthly income.
I just want to make sure, because we still kind of had it on as a separate agenda item, and I wanted to make sure that was the consensus of this committee. So I am going to make a note for myself to take it off the agenda.
Madam Chair, if I might,
Yes.
we probably should go back to the minutes and make sure a motion carried on that. If not, we need to probably make one and pass it. But it seems to me we did.
I believe we did. There was one minor little change that we voted on to clean up that language. Judge Hoskin, what was the change you made this last time to your gross income definition?
Give
Do
me
you
just
know?
1 second.
Okay.
I'll pull out my draft. Just give me a second here. I know we added for purposes of calculating child support in that. And I'm not finding my draft, so. Yeah,
Okay,
there
it's
was
okay. I
a
put
couple
you
of
on the-
minor changes, but that's okay.
Okay.
I thought I put it in my folder today, but I'm not finding it quick enough to. Oh, here it is. Yeah, we added for purposes of calculating child support in the first line, and that's the only change that I had from the last meeting. Everything else I thought we resolved.
We did. We voted on everything. We even voted on that change, but so this is the final language on gross income. And with it incorporating.
It is until I make further changes. For the healthcare and the.
Oh, yes. And of course, our discussion today will be modifying this further. You're correct.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. With that, I think many of the other items were final language, and it's not that we haven't voted, but I want everybody, next meeting we'll actually have that nice solid, this is the language that was fully voted on, make sure we have it right, that's consistent with our prior minutes, that no mistakes were made in regards to definitions, and some final language on our medical and our healthcare are changing now. So I will keep medical. I'm got myself all over the place. Agenda item 19 is discussing future agenda items, which is what I am doing right now. I will keep medical and childcare on the agenda because of the movement we're making now to the adjustment of gross monthly income and that definition. And gross monthly income will stay on the agenda for that same purpose. Final language on the other items. What did not make it to the committee was definitions. We did vote to use definitions of split parenting, serial parenting, and shared parenting that Wisconsin had. I did draft that. It was provided for the main document for Judge Robb, but it did not get provided to the committee. So we will review that at the next on the next agenda to make sure we're okay with the definitions as written. We will obviously, at the next agenda, go over our new methods of calculating gross monthly income, Mr. Sanford's high income calculation proposal, and percentages that I present next time. Other additional new items for future agenda that I need to add that isn't already on this list and the things we talked about today?
Karen Cliff, not a new item, but item 12, was this done already? Or can we take this one off? Or?
The data itself, you're correct. That is done. We can take it off. The how childcare is calculated, of course, with our new discussion with the gross income definition, we will have to discuss it some more. But yes, the data is done. Okay. Additional new items anybody wants to talk about other than the ongoing? And then the assignments, of course, that were given out today on each of the agenda items, that will be carried forward onto the new agenda. Okay. Our next meeting date is what, Joy? March 23rd. And are we good on the legislative buildings still? So we're good on the same locations, possible room changes. Always look at the room numbers. And we will now take public comment. Do we have anybody in Las Vegas that would like to give public comment at this time? Hello, ma'am. If you could state your name, and then for public comment, everybody receives 3 minutes each, and I will time you, and I am a little bit rude and cut you off, but you'll get exactly 3 minutes, okay?
Not a problem. Thank you. My name is Stephanie McDonald. I am the directing attorney at the Self-Help Center at Family Court here in the 8th Judicial District. I just wanted to first thank the committee for all your work. I've been a fly on the wall at a number of your meetings, either in person or by phone, just to sort of keep an eye on what the pulse is of where we might be heading. As you're all aware, there are a large percentage of self-represented litigants in family court. There are approximately 60% of people who are going through a family court case who are trying to do it on their own, not because they want to, but because they simply can't afford to have an attorney to represent them. I think what you have probably gathered from a lot of the public comment over the many meetings is frustration with the system, complicated procedures, complicated statutes. My only plea to this committee is to make things as simple as possible. I like the idea of standardized guides that people can follow. The less math they have to do, the easier it is. We all became lawyers because we don't like math. The average population likes it even less, I can promise you. If there are standard guides, standard times for modification, a lot of things that would help keep people out of court, which I'm sure judges appreciate as well, because whenever there's a small issue, people have no choice but to go to court. And when there's clear guidance for them, it will help them make those decisions on their own, stay out of court, save the court time, save everybody a lot of heartache. Thank you, everybody.
Do we have any? You can stay with us for just a second. I have a question for you, Ms. McDonald. When you say standard times for modification, do you have any ideas on that for us? In terms of, are you thinking just not the 20% change in income, or do you have other ideas on that?
Well, as I hear the committee talking about, we're going to build in childcare expenses, which again are sort of front-loaded for younger children. As I hear talking about emancipation, which is something that happens towards the end. Right now, we're kind of locked into that 3-year or 20%, which doesn't always make sense. If child support is set when a child is 4 years old, and we're taking into account daycare expenses, if that expense disappears in a year, is that going to be considered a change of circumstance? Right now, it's not particularly clear because, well, actually, I think it's not, because change in circumstance goes into gross monthly income. So maybe making modifications more applicable to milestones of a child's age and development, and what are the natural issues that are arising with parents and child expenses. 3 years, a lot can happen in 3 years.
Great. Are there any other questions from the committee? Okay, hearing none. Thank you so much for your advice. We appreciate it. Is there anybody else in Las Vegas that would like to give public comment? Seeing none. Anybody on the phone that would like to give public comment? Hearing none. Anybody in Carson City that would like to give public comment? Seeing none, we will move on to a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
In a second.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, say nay.
Aye.
All right.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
everybody.
everybody. See you on the 23rd.
Hey, Kim?
Yes?
Do I remember correctly that we're going to have our economist mock up a table for us, or did we address that?
Ms. Murray is telling me on the side that she will work on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Kim, this is Karen. Kim?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we have 2 dates in March. We've got the one date in April.
We're going to need
We don't
more
want 2
dates.
in April. I was just going to say, I know the agenda had future dates, but I didn't want to bring it up because I'm sure everyone wanted to go, but we're looking at maybe 2 dates in April.
Yeah, my goal was to take a good hard look at it when I got back to my office and get an email out through Joy to the committee about maybe some possible other dates, and actually reassessing just what we have from here out, because we set that so long ago, and take a good look at it. Probably
Okay,
not.
thank you.
Okay, thank you.